"I will heal you," said the new nanny as she faced the millionaire's dying triplets. Without training, without diagnosis, and without asking for permission, she defied everything medicine had declared impossible. While specialists failed with their machines and formulas, she used only touch, song, and presence. Days later, the once motionless bodies began to respond, and the house was filled with a kind of miracle no one wanted to admit. In the highest penthouse of the Bel Air Gardens condominium, the Los Angeles sky opened up into an infinite blue horizon. From there, Edward Monroe could see the ocean and feel the breeze that carried the scent of salt and wealth. At 52, he had built a tech empire, transforming a small software company into a national powerhouse. His name was featured in business magazines, and his bank account impressed even the most affluent. For Edward, everything in life was a matter of control, strategy, and power. But on that June morning, control was slipping through his fingers like fine sand. In his office, paneled with fine wood, his red, sleepless eyes were fixed on the diagnosis printed on letterhead paper. Dr. Anthony Rivers, the country's most renowned neurologist, had confirmed what 3 other specialists had already said. His 7-year-old triplet daughters, Beatrice, Louisa, and Rafaela, had a rare neurodegenerative disease unprecedented in American medicine. We estimate a week 2 at most. There is no known treatment. I'm very sorry, Mr. Monroe. The doctor's voice echoed in his mind as his gaze swept over the photos of the girls on his desk. Born from an in vitro fertilization after the passing of his wife, Clarice, who did not survive the multiple births, the triplets were his only family. His only link to something that could be called love. The cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Gerald, his personal assistant. "Sir, I need to inform you that the girls are showing new symptoms. The medical team is already in their room. Dr. Rivers requests your immediate presence." Edward didn't answer. He hung up the phone and walked to the private elevator that connected his office to the rest of the penthouse. On the way, his mind calculated possibilities as it always did when faced with problems. Perhaps an experimental treatment abroad, a drug not yet approved. How much would it cost? The price didn't matter. He would pay it. The hallway leading to the triplets' room was filled with medical equipment. The children's decor, with its bright colors and animated characters, contrasted cruelly with the hospital apparatus that now dominated the environment. Nurses moved silently, exchanging worried glances. In the spacious room, the 3 beds had been pushed together, forming a single surface where Beatrice, Louisa, and Rafaela rested side by side, connected to monitors that emitted constant beeps. Their black curly hair spread across the pillows like small seas of ebony. Their eyes, once lively and curious, now remained half-closed, distant. Dr. Rivers approached Edward, his expression grave. "The condition is progressing faster than we anticipated. The medications to control the symptoms are no longer as effective. I suggest you consider taking them home. Hospitalization will not bring significant benefits at this stage." The words fell like stones. Edward, the man who always had answers, remained silent. His fortune, his power, his contacts, none of it mattered now. For the first time, he felt small, insignificant. "Prepare everything for us to go home today," he finally ordered. That same afternoon, the penthouse in Bel Air was transformed into a semi-hospital unit. The east wing, where the girls' rooms were, was adapted with state-of-the-art equipment. A team of nurses was hired for round-the-clock shifts. The main room, where the 3 would spend their last days, was decorated with their favorite things: stuffed animals, storybooks, projections of stars on the ceiling. The housekeeper, Mrs. Sonia, who had served the family for over a decade, coordinated the staff with teary eyes. The butler, Joachim, a serious and methodical man who had been with Edward since the beginning of his career, remained firm, although sadness was visible in his stiffened features. The hours passed as if made of lead. The staff avoided conversation, walking through the corridors like shadows. Doctors came and went, adjusting equipment, checking vital signs, exchanging discouraged looks. Edward remained seated between his daughters' beds, holding their small hands, watching every movement, every breath. It was the next morning, as the sun began to tint the Los Angeles horizon, that the doorbell rang. Joachim, puzzled by such an early visit, went to the door. On the other side, a woman of about 40 was waiting. Her brown hair was tied in a simple bun. She wore discreet clothes without adornments or jewelry. Her eyes, a deep brown, conveyed an unusual serenity. "Good morning. My name is Helena Grace. I've come to care for the girls," she said, her voice firm and gentle. Joachim frowned, confused. "Pardon me, madam, but we were not informed of any new hires for the medical team." "I'm not a doctor," Helena replied with a slight smile. "I'm just someone who has come to care." The butler hesitated, his hand firm on the door, ready to close it. At that moment, Edward appeared in the hall. "Who is it, Joachim?" "A woman, sir. She says she's here to care for the girls, but we have no record of her being hired." Edward observed the woman. Something about her intrigued him. It wasn't just her simple appearance in contrast to the luxury around them, nor her confident posture in the face of his evident wealth. It was something in her eyes, as if she knew exactly why she was there and what she had to do. "How did you know about my daughters?" Edward asked suspiciously. Helena held his gaze firmly. "There are things that don't need to be announced to be known. Mr. Monroe, I'm here because this is where I am supposed to be right now." "And what do you intend to do for my daughters that a team of renowned doctors couldn't?" "I don't promise cures or miracles," Helena answered. "I only offer presence. Sometimes that is all we need when facing the inevitable." Edward felt a mixture of indignation and curiosity. Who was this woman who spoke of the inevitable with such naturalness? He was about to send her away when he heard a faint call from the girls' room. "Dad, is someone there?" It was the voice of Louisa, the most sensitive of the three, who hadn't spoken a full word in days. Edward hesitated, looked at Joachim, who maintained an expression of disapproval, and then at Helena, who waited patiently. "Come in," he said finally. "But be warned, any suspicious behavior, and you will be removed immediately." Helena nodded and followed Edward down the hall, while Joachim watched the scene with growing apprehension. Something told him that the routine of that house, already disturbed by the impending tragedy, was about to change even more with the arrival of this stranger. And he was right. No one could have predicted the impact Helena Grace would have on that luxury penthouse in the coming days. No one could have imagined that this simple woman, without titles or credentials, would provoke a silent revolution between walls of marble and works of art. As the Los Angeles sun rose on the horizon, bathing the city in golden light, a new story began to be written in the Monroe penthouse, a story about power and helplessness, science and faith, control and surrender. A story about the deepest and most inexplicable of human feelings, hope in the face of the impossible. Helena's entrance into the Triplets' room brought a subtle but immediate change. It was as if the air, previously heavy with medication and despair, was suddenly pierced by a different current. The girls, who had remained almost motionless, moved their heads slightly toward the door as she entered. Edward watched the woman's every move with attentive eyes. Helena didn't ask for permission or hesitate. With calm steps, she approached the joined beds and sat on the edge, close enough to touch the hands of all three girls. "Hello, little ones," she said in a low, melodious voice. "My name is Helena." Beatrice, the most assertive of the three, was the first to react. Her eyes, previously dull, seemed to gain a faint glint of curiosity. "Are you a doctor?" she asked with difficulty, her voice almost a whisper. "No, dear. I'm just someone who has come to stay with you." Rafaela, the quietest, watched Helena with intensity. Louisa, for her part, made a slight movement with her hand as if trying to reach for something. Helena smiled and took Louisa's small hand in hers. The contact seemed to calm the girl, who closed her eyes with a more serene expression than she had shown in recent days. Edward remained standing near the door, restless and confused. Part of him wanted to interrupt the scene, to demand credentials, explanations, but another part, one he rarely listened to, told him to wait and watch. "I'm going to make you some tea," Helena announced, rising smoothly. "And then, if you'll let me, I'll tell you a story I learned a long time ago, when I lived in the countryside of rural Georgia." The girls didn't answer, but their eyes followed Helena as she left the room. Edward intercepted her in the hallway. "Listen, madam." "Helena, is it? I don't know who sent you or what you intend, but I need to make a few things clear. My daughters are under strict medical care. Any interference with their treatment—" "I won't interfere with anything, Mr. Monroe," Helena interrupted calmly. "The medications, the equipment, the doctors, all of that has its place. I am here to fill a different space. And what space would that be? The one that exists between the body and the soul, between what science can measure and what only the heart can perceive. Edward felt disarmed by the simplicity of her answer. Before he could reply, Helena was already heading toward the kitchen, leaving him with unspoken words and a strange feeling that perhaps he didn't have all the control he thought he did. In the kitchen, Mrs. Sonia was preparing lunch, assisted by 2 younger staff members. Helena's arrival caused a moment of tension. The housekeeper, protective as she was, raised her eyebrows in suspicion. "Good morning." "Does the master know you are here?" she asked, strategically placing herself between Helena and the stove. "Yes, Mrs. Sonia. I'm here to care for the girls. I'd like to make them some tea." The housekeeper, surprised to hear her name from a stranger's lips, hesitated. Helena smiled gently. "Beatrice, Louisa, and Raffaella are special girls. They deserve every care at this moment." Something in the way Helena spoke the triplets' names, with a respectful, almost reverent familiarity, made Mrs. Sonia lower her guard. Silently she made space, indicating where the herbs and the teapot were. Helena moved through the kitchen with ease, as if she already knew every corner. She selected chamomile, lemon balm, and a pinch of something she carried in a small pouch. As the water boiled, her hands worked in precise, almost ritualistic gestures. The staff watched, fascinated by this inexplicable presence that transformed a simple tea into something almost sacred. Back in the room, Helena found the girls in the same position, but their eyes lit up when they saw her. Edward remained seated in an armchair in the corner, pretending to read documents on his tablet, but in reality watching Helena's every move. Gently, she helped each of the triplets take a few sips of the tea. First Beatrice, then Louisa, finally Raffaella. It didn't matter that the doctors had said they could barely swallow. Helena didn't seem to care about prognoses. She was just there, present, patient. When she finished serving the tea, Helena pulled up a chair and sat between the beds. She began to sing softly, an old melody, the kind that seems to come from a deep, almost forgotten America. Her voice, neither too high nor too low, filled the room like clean water filling an empty glass. Edward watched something extraordinary happen. The girls visibly relaxed. The heart monitors showed a slight but significant decrease in frequency. Their breathing, previously ragged, found a more natural rhythm. Dr. Rivers, who had entered the room silently to check on his patients, frowned at the scene. He approached Edward and whispered, "Who is this woman? What is she doing here?" Edward didn't know how to answer. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? He opted for the simplest version. She's a caregiver. She's helping with the girls. The doctor cast a skeptical glance at Helena, who continued to sing, oblivious to his presence. "Mr. Monroe, I understand your desperation, but resorting to alternative methods at this point may only create false hope. Your daughter's condition is irreversible." Edward nodded mechanically, but his eyes never left his daughters, who seemed more comfortable than they had been in days. The doctor, realizing he wasn't being heard, withdrew with a resigned sigh. The hours passed. Helena remained in the room, sometimes singing, sometimes telling stories in a low voice, sometimes simply holding the girls' hands in silence. She didn't try to talk to Edward, respecting his space and his pain. As night fell over Los Angeles, painting the sky purple and orange, something unexpected happened. Raffaella, the most withdrawn of the three, who hadn't spoken in days, whispered something so low that only Helena, sitting beside her, could hear. "What is it, dear?" Helena asked, leaning in. "Can I see the stars?" Raffaella repeated a little louder. Edward jumped to his feet, approaching the bed. Helena looked at him as if asking for permission. He nodded, speechless. With gentle movements, Helena temporarily disconnected some of the less essential equipment, and with Edward's help, carried Raffaella to the balcony that opened up to the Pacific Ocean. The night was clear, and the stars shone brightly over the illuminated city. "Look, Rafa," Helena whispered, pointing to the sky. "Every star has a story. Each one is a light that has traveled a very long way to find us here." The girl stared upward, her eyes reflecting points of light. For a moment, her pale face came alive. Beatrice and Louisa, from the bed, watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and longing. Edward, noticing this, made an impulsive decision. "Let's take all three," he said, already moving to help his other daughters. With the assistance of the on-duty nurses, the three triplets were settled into lounge chairs on the spacious balcony. The essential equipment was adapted to allow for the moment outdoors. The girls, side by side, contemplated the night sky while Helena told legends about the constellations, mixing Native American stories with Greek myths so naturally that it seemed like a single universal narrative. Edward watched from a distance this improbable scene. His daughters, condemned by medicine, were now looking at the sky with expressions he hadn't seen in weeks. Expressions of wonder, of presence, of life. On the other side of the balcony, half hidden in the shadows, Joachim observed the scene with growing suspicion. For the butler, trained in the strictest school of etiquette and protocol, this woman represented a dangerous anomaly, an uncontrolled variable in an equation that was already far too complex. As the stars slowly turned over Los Angeles, something began to change in that luxurious penthouse. Something subtle, like the first thread of light before dawn, but undeniable as the rising tide. Hope, an unexpected guest, was seeping into the corners like a fragrance that refuses to be ignored. And Helena, calm and present like the mountains surrounding the city, seemed to be the silent bearer of this feeling that neither money nor science had been able to bring back to that home. The next morning, Edward woke with a start. He had fallen asleep in the armchair in his daughter's room, something unthinkable in his previous routine. For a moment, reality hit him like a punch. His daughters were fading before his eyes. But then a different sound caught his attention. Laughter. Faint, almost whispered, but unmistakable. He turned quickly and saw Helena sitting on the edge of the bed, a book open on her lap. The triplets, still pale and fragile, but with more alert eyes, were smiling as she imitated different voices for each character in the story. "Good morning, Mr. Munro," Helena greeted without interrupting her reading. "The girls woke up hungry today." Edward approached incredulous. It had been days since his daughters could barely swallow liquids, let alone feel hungry. "Hungry? You're hungry, girls." Beatrice, always the trio's spokesperson, nodded weakly. "I want that oatmeal Grandma used to make. Do you remember, Dad?" The question struck Edward like an arrow. His mother, Mrs. Teresa, had passed away 2 years prior, leaving a void he tried to fill with nannies and housekeepers. The oatmeal with cinnamon was a tradition on Sunday mornings at their ranch in Santa Barbara, where they spent weekends before the girls' health deteriorated. "I remember." "Honey," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll ask Mrs. Sonia to make it right away." As he left the room, Edward met Joachim in the hallway. The butler, impeccable in his uniform, held his lips in a thin line of disapproval. "Is there a problem, Joachim?" "Sir, I believe we need to discuss this. A woman you have allowed into our home." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Our home, Joachim?" The butler was not intimidated. After 20 years of service, he had certain liberties. "Forgive me, sir. In your home, but I am genuinely concerned. We know nothing about this Helena. She has no credentials, presented no references, and appeared literally out of nowhere." "And the girls laughed today, Joachim." "They laughed and asked for food," Edward replied, walking past the butler toward the kitchen. Joachim followed him, determined. "Sir, I understand your hope, but we must be realistic. Dr. Rivers was clear about the prognosis. This woman may be creating false expectations, perhaps even harming the girls' comfort in their final—" Edward stopped abruptly and turned, his eyes flashing. "Don't you dare finish that sentence, Joachim. Not today." In the kitchen, Edward found Mrs. Sonia already preparing breakfast. The housekeeper, who knew the family's preferences well, had already set out the ingredients for the oatmeal. "Mrs. Helena told me the girls woke up with an appetite," she explained, mixing oats into the hot milk. "It's a good sign, don't you think, sir?" Edward nodded, sitting on one of the high stools at the central island. He watched the cook work, adding cinnamon and a bit of honey to the oatmeal, exactly as his mother used to. There was something comforting in that everyday scene, as if normalcy for a brief moment had returned to the house. "Mrs. Sonia, what do you think of her?" "Of Helena?" The housekeeper continued stirring the oatmeal, thoughtful. "At first I thought she was strange, I won't deny it. Showing up like that, out of the blue. But there's something about her, sir. Her way of looking at you that makes you feel understood." Edward reflected on those words as he returned to the triplets' room, carrying a tray with 3 bowls of steaming oatmeal. On the way, he passed the medication room, where the head nurse was checking the day's dosages. "How are the vital signs this morning?" he asked, pausing briefly. The nurse consulted her notes, looking slightly confused. "They stabilized during the night, Mr. Munro. Louisa's blood pressure, which was concerning yesterday, has normalized, and the oxygenation for all 3 has improved a bit. It's not a dramatic change, but it's unexpected." Edward just nodded and continued on his way, the tray in his hands like an offering. In the room, Helena had opened the curtains, allowing the morning sunlight to stream in gently. The girls were in a semi-sitting position, propped up by pillows. Their faces, still marked by illness, seemed less tense. "Look what Dad brought," Helena announced with restrained enthusiasm, helping Edward position the tray. What followed was an almost sacred moment for Edward. With infinite patience, Helena helped each of the triplets eat a few spoonfuls of oatmeal. It wasn't much, but for children who could barely swallow water the day before, it felt like a miracle. "Helena told us you used to live near the sea, Dad," said Beatrice between spoonfuls. "In a place called—" "What was it again?" "Big Sur," Helena replied, gently wiping the corner of Louisa's mouth with a napkin. "In California. A place where the sea meets the sky in a way that it seems they talk to each other every day." "And did you swim there?" asked Rafaela, the quietest, surprising everyone with her interest. Helena smiled, her eyes shining with memories. "Every day at sunrise. The sea teaches us a lot about life, you know? It's never still, never the same. Even when it seems calm on the surface, there's a whole world of life happening in the depths." Edward observed the interaction, torn between hope and suspicion. Was it possible that this woman, who had appeared from nowhere, was truly doing what entire teams of doctors could not? Or was he just witnessing the last moments of lucidity before the final decline, as Dr. Rivers had warned? The following hours brought a series of small but significant events. Louisa asked for her hair to be brushed, something she had refused for days because of the pain. Rafaela wanted to look at old family photographs, pointing to and naming cousins and aunts in each picture. Beatrice, always the strongest, even managed to sit up completely in bed without help for a few minutes. Helena moved about the room with a disconcerting naturalness, as if she had always been a part of that house, that family. She didn't consult clocks, didn't follow rigid protocols. She seemed to be guided by something more subtle. The look of a tired girl, the more difficult breath of another, the sudden silence of the third. And to each signal she responded with what was needed: a story, a song, a gentle touch, or simply respectful silence. In the early afternoon, while the girls were napping, Edward called Helena to talk on the balcony. The Los Angeles sky was exceptionally blue, contrasting with the green mountains that embraced the city. "I need to understand who you are," he said bluntly. "What you are really doing. How you knew about my daughters." Helena leaned against the railing, looking out over the city below before answering. "Some people have a calling, Mr. Munro. Not something mystical or supernatural. Just a purpose they feel so strongly they can't ignore it. And your purpose is to care for my daughters?" "My purpose is to be present when presence is what matters most." Edward shook his head, frustrated by the evasive answer. "That doesn't explain how you knew about them. How you appeared at my door at the exact right moment." Helena turned to face him, her brown eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed to transcend her apparent age. "Suffering emits a sound that some can hear, Mr. Munro. I heard yours. And your daughters." Before Edward could press for more concrete answers, they were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rivers, who was making his daily visit. The doctor entered the triplets' room with Joachim, who cast a triumphant look at Helena, as if scientific reinforcement had arrived to unmask the charlatan. The examination was meticulous. Dr. Rivers checked every sign, every reflex, every recent test result. His face, normally a mask of professionalism, betrayed signs of growing confusion. "The girls are stable," he said finally, removing his stethoscope. "There has been a small but measurable improvement in some parameters." Edward felt a flicker of hope. "Does that mean—" "No, Mr. Munro," the doctor interrupted sternly. "It does not mean a reversal of the condition. The underlying disease remains untreatable. These fluctuations are unusual, but they do not alter the overall prognosis. The doctor glanced sideways at Helena, who remained quiet by the window. I understand you are seeking comfort wherever you can find it, but I suggest caution with unconventional approaches. Certain practices can interfere with medication and create false impressions of improvement. After the doctor left, Joachim remained in the room, obsessively organizing the medications. His presence, once discreet, now seemed like a sentinel, watching Helena's every move with ill-disguised suspicion. You should consider checking this. Lady's credentials, he said to Edward when Helena momentarily left to get water, just as a precaution. Edward looked at his daughters, who seemed calmer and more present than they had in days, despite what the doctor had said. Do what you think is necessary, Joachim. But she stays. As the day wore on, the tension between Helena and Joachim became palpable. The butler, a representative of order and logic, could not accept this presence that defied all rules. Helena, for her part, continued her silent work, without directly confronting the growing hostility. At the end of the day, as the Los Angeles sky turned orange and red, Edward found Helena on the balcony again. She held a small package in her arms. I brought something for the girls, she said, opening the package to reveal 3 small handmade cloth dolls. I made them while they were sleeping. Edward examined the dolls, simple, without expensive adornments, but with a hand-crafted care that made them special. Each had a small embroidered detail that differentiated it, a star, a moon, a sun. Why? Because sometimes we need something to hold on to when the world feels too uncertain, Helena replied. Something to remind us that we are not alone, even when everything suggests otherwise. As she gave the dolls to the triplets, the sun to Beatrice, the moon to Louisa, the star to Raffaella, Edward watched the scene with a growing sense that something bigger was happening in that penthouse, something that escaped the rational explanations that had always guided his life. In the hallway, Joachim was speaking on the phone in a low voice, taking notes in his impeccable handwriting. His gaze, when it met Edward's, conveyed a clear message. The investigation into Helena Grace had begun. The third day dawned with a light rain over Los Angeles. Grey clouds hugged the hills, and the city seemed wrapped in a veil of mist. In the Monroe penthouse, the routine began with a different energy. The on-duty nurses and doctors whispered about the small but consistent improvements in the triplets. Edward woke up after his first uninterrupted night of sleep since the diagnosis. He found Helena in the kitchen, preparing a different kind of porridge with fresh fruit cut into tiny pieces. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe," she greeted, without looking up from her work. "I thought the girls could try something more substantial today." Edward poured himself some coffee, watching her work. In just 2 days, Helena had established such a natural presence in the house that it was hard to remember what it was like before her. The staff, initially wary, now consulted her about the triplets' preferences. Even the nurses seemed to seek her guidance when administering medication. "Helena, I need you to be frank with me," Edward said, placing his cup on the counter. "What is really happening? Are the girls getting better? Or is this just a pause before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Helena turned to him, her hands stained with papaya pulp. "Life rarely follows the scripts we write for it, Mr. Monroe, especially when it comes to goodbyes." "That doesn't answer my question, because perhaps it's the wrong question," she replied simply. "Instead of asking where we are going, maybe it's more important to observe where we are now. And right now your daughters are present. They are here." Edward felt a familiar frustration growing inside him. This woman had a gift for disarming him with answers that seemed simple, but hid layers of meaning he couldn't fully grasp. Before he could insist, a sharp cry cut through the air coming from the girls' room. Edward ran, his heart pounding, followed closely by Helena. When he arrived, he found a scene of panic. Louisa was convulsing on the bed, her small body arched in violent spasms. The on-duty nurse was trying to restrain her, while Beatrice and Raffaella watched in terror. "Call Dr. Rivers," Edward shouted to one of the staff members who had appeared at the door. Helena, however, wasted no time on orders. She moved directly to the bed, gently moving the nurse aside. "She's not breathing right," the professional explained, visibly nervous. It started suddenly. There was no warning. Helena positioned herself behind Louisa, wrapping her in a firm but not restrictive embrace. She began to sing into her ear. a low, rhythmic melody that seemed to have no words, only sounds. Her hands moved in gentle circles over the girl's chest. Edward watched, torn between the urge to do something and the strange certainty that Helena knew exactly what she was doing. "We should administer the anticonvulsant," the nurse suggested, holding a prepared syringe. "Wait," Edward requested, not taking his eyes off the scene before him. The minutes that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. Louisa's breathing, initially erratic, began to find a more natural rhythm, unconsciously matching the cadence of Helena's song. The spasms gradually became light tremors until they ceased completely. When Louisa's eyes finally opened, there was a clarity in them that surprised everyone. She looked directly at Helena, who was still holding her, and whispered, "I saw Mom." The words fell in the room like stones in still water, creating ripples of impact. Edward felt the air leave his lungs. Vivi! Triplets' mother was a subject rarely mentioned, a pain he kept carefully preserved. Helena just nodded as if the statement made perfect sense. "And what did she say, little one?" Louisa smiled faintly. "That it wasn't time yet. That you knew that." Edward stumbled until he found support against the wall. The nurse, dumbfounded, looked from Helena to Louisa, unable to process what she had just witnessed. It was at that moment that Dr. Rivers entered the room, followed by Joachim. The doctor, seeing Louisa conscious and apparently stable, frowned. "What happened here?" "I was informed of a severe seizure." The nurse, still dazed, tried to explain the sequence of events, but her words came out disjointed. Helena, with her characteristic serenity, gently moved away from Louisa, allowing the doctor to examine her. "She had a seizure, doctor." "But we managed to control it," she said simply. Dr. Rivers examined Louisa with meticulous attention, checking pupils, reflexes, vital signs. His scientific expression gave way to a poorly disguised confusion. "Her signs are surprisingly stable. Better than yesterday, in fact." He turned to Edward. "What exactly was administered here?" "Nothing, doctor," Edward replied. "Just her." He indicated Helena with a vague gesture. The doctor looked at Helena with growing suspicion. "Madam, I must be clear. Interfering with the medical treatment of critically ill patients can constitute the illegal practice of medicine. If you are using any kind of non-prescribed substance—" "Dr. Rivers," Edward interrupted firmly. "Helena did not administer any substance. I was here the whole time. Then how do you explain this?" The doctor gestured to Louisa, who was now resting peacefully, watching everyone with attentive eyes. "Seizures of this type don't just stop spontaneously, not without medication. Perhaps there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your medicine." "Doctor," Helena replied in a soft voice without hostility. The doctor opened his mouth to retort but was interrupted by Rafaela, who spoke with a surprising strength for her condition. "She helps us breathe, doctor. When it hurts, she makes it hurt less." The simplicity of that childish explanation left the doctor momentarily speechless. Edward took the opportunity to ask him to examine Beatrice and Rafaela as well. While the doctor worked, Joachim remained at the door, watching Helena with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. After the examination, Dr. Rivers called Edward into the hallway. His face was grave but also genuinely confused. "Mr. Monroe, I can't explain what's happening here. The girls are showing signs of stabilization that do not correspond to the predicted degenerative pattern. I'm not saying it's a cure. The disease is still present, but something is significantly slowing the progression." "And isn't that good?" Edward asked, a thread of hope in his voice. "It's unexpected. I'll need to consult colleagues, review the literature. We may be dealing with a previously undocumented variant of the disease." The doctor hesitated. "As for this woman, be cautious. Unconventional methods can bring temporary comfort, but they can also create unrealistic expectations." After the doctor left, Edward returned to the room to find a surprising scene. The three girls sitting up in bed, more alert than they had been in weeks, while Helena braided Beatrice's hair. Louisa, who had been convulsing minutes before, now held her moon doll with a faint but present smile. "Dad, Helena said we can try to eat in the sunroom today," Beatrice announced, her face lighting up at the idea. The sunroom was a glass-enclosed space on the lower floor, filled with tropical plants and a small fountain. The girls loved the place but hadn't visited it since the onset of their illness. "Do you feel strong enough for that?" Edward asked, trying to contain the emotion in his voice. Helena will help us, Rafaela replied with an absolute confidence that tugged at Edward's heart. Later, after a complex logistical operation to move essential medical equipment, the triplets were in the sunroom, seated in special chairs, wrapped in light blankets. The natural light filtering through the leaves created dancing patterns on their pale but animated faces. It was the first meal they had shared in the same room in weeks. Helena had prepared small, colorful plates, purees, soft fruits, a little shredded chicken. The girls didn't eat much, but the simple act of being there, trying, represented a victory unimaginable just days before. Edward watched from a distance, talking in a low voice with the head of security. I want to know everything about her. Everything. If you need to hire private investigators, do it. It wasn't suspicion that moved him now, but a desperate need to understand. To find an explanation for the hope that was growing inside him again, against all odds. On the other side of the garden, Joachim was finishing a phone call. His usually impassive face showed signs of disturbance. Sir, he called, approaching Edward, I've received some preliminary information about Mrs. Helena Grace. And? There is no official record of a Helena Grace with the corresponding approximate age and physical description. No birth certificate, no social security number, no record in the healthcare or education systems. Edward frowned. That's impossible. No one is a ghost in this bureaucratic country. Exactly, sir. Which means that this is likely not her real name. Edward looked at Helena, who was helping Louisa drink some juice, her expression as calm as ever. Who was this woman who had appeared out of nowhere and was inexplicably bringing his daughters back to life? Keep investigating, Joachim. I need to know who she really is. The butler nodded, pleased to have planted the seed of doubt. As he walked away, he didn't notice Helena's gaze on him, not accusatory, not fearful, just aware, as if she knew exactly what was happening and didn't care. At the end of that extraordinary afternoon, when the girls were taken back to their room, exhausted but visibly happy, Edward found Helena on the balcony, watching the sunset over the Pacific. Thank you, he said simply, standing beside her, for what you did today with Louisa, for what you're doing for all of them. Helena smiled faintly. I didn't do anything they couldn't do themselves, Mr. Monroe. I just reminded their bodies how to feel alive. Helena, Edward hesitated, choosing his words. I know that's not your real name. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the gold of the setting sun. Names are just labels we use to recognize each other, Mr. Monroe. What matters is not what I am called, but who I am when I am with your daughters. And who are you? I am someone who knows pain and chose to transform it into presence, she replied. Just as you can be if you allow it. Before Edward could question the meaning of those words, a sharp cry cut the air once more. This time, however, it was not a cry of pain but of surprise. They ran back to the room to find the nurse gaping, watching Beatrice, who was standing beside the bed, her legs trembling but supporting her weight. Look, Dad. Look what I'm doing, the girl exclaimed, her face lit up with an almost forgotten joy. Edward felt the world stop for an instant. His daughter, whom doctors said would never walk again, was standing, unsteady, fragile but standing. When he looked at Helena, he saw silent tears streaming down the woman's serene face, the first display of emotion she had allowed since her arrival. And in that moment, it didn't matter who she was or where she came from. What mattered was the life that was inexplicably returning to this home that days before had been preparing only for goodbye. The news swept through the house like a strong wind, impossible to contain. Beatrice had stood up. The staff whispered in the hallways, exchanging looks of hope and confusion. The nurses consulted monitors and charts, searching for scientific explanations for the inexplicable. And at the center of this whirlwind, Helena remained calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The next morning, the triplets' room was transformed into a small laboratory. Dr. Rivers, accompanied by 2 specialists, a neurologist and an immunologist, conducted a battery of tests on the girls. They drew blood, checked reflexes, analyzed pupils, and asked complex questions to assess cognitive functions. Edward waited in his office, anxiety consuming him from within. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctors entered, carrying clipboards and perplexed expressions. "Mr. Monroe," Dr. Rivers began, "we are facing something I cannot explain within the parameters of current medicine." The neurologist, an older man with thick-framed glasses, added, "The inflammatory markers have decreased considerably. The myelination that was in the process of degenerating is showing signs of stabilization. In simpler terms," the immunologist added, "it's as if your daughter's bodies are relearning not to attack themselves." Edward felt a wave of hope so intense he had to lean on his desk. "Does this mean they're going to recover? That they're going to live?" The three doctors exchanged cautious glances. It was Dr. Rivers who answered, "We cannot make that claim yet. What we are seeing is unprecedented. The medical literature has no record of spontaneous reversal in this specific type of autoimmune condition." "But what about Beatrice? She was standing." "Yes, and that is remarkable," the neurologist agreed. "But we must be scientifically rigorous. It could be a temporary remission. It could be a variant of the disease we didn't know about. It could be a miracle," Edward suggested, with a bitter irony that surprised even himself. The doctors shifted uncomfortably. Science had no room for miracles. "We would like to propose a new treatment protocol," Dr. Rivers said, changing the subject. "Something more adapted to this unusual situation. And also," he hesitated briefly, "we would like to interview Mrs. Grace." Edward stood up. "Why?" "To understand her methods, what she is doing with your daughters." "She doesn't do anything to them," Edward replied, surprised by his own protective instinct toward Helena. "She is simply with them. She talks, sings, tells stories." The doctors exchanged skeptical glances. The neurologist cleared his throat. "Mr. Monroe, with all due respect, there must be more to it. Perhaps natural substances, herbal remedies, some kind of undocumented alternative therapy." "Ask her," Edward replied curtly, ending the meeting. When the doctors left, Edward remained in his office, contemplating the view of the city. Los Angeles stretched out before him, vibrant and chaotic, oblivious to the small universe of hope and mystery forming at the top of that luxurious building. As a man who had built his life on foundations of logic and control, Edward struggled to reconcile what he was witnessing with what his rational brain could accept. He was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Joachim, his face a mask of professional seriousness that couldn't completely hide an unusual agitation. "Sir, I have important information about Mrs. Grace." Edward indicated a chair. "Sit down and tell me." The butler remained standing, as always. "We managed to locate someone with a similar description, but with another name. Helena Cameron, born in Long Beach 43 years ago. And what did you find out about her?" Joachim consulted his meticulous notes. "She graduated in nursing from the UCLA School of Nursing, worked for years at the UCLA Medical Center. She was considered exceptional, especially in pediatric oncology." "Was?" Edward caught the past tense immediately. "Yes, sir. She left the profession 8 years ago after—" Joachim hesitated, a rare occurrence for him. "After the death of her twin sister, Marina Cameron. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, her sister died from the same rare condition that affects your daughters." Edward felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. A strange sensation formed in his throat. Not exactly fear, not completely surprise, but something deeper and more indefinable. "Continue," he ordered in a hoarse voice. "After her sister's passing, Helena disappeared from the official radar. There are no records of formal employment, a fixed address, or significant banking activity. However," Joachim hesitated again, "we found mentions of her in online forums for families with terminally ill children. Apparently, she has been appearing in different cities, always caring for children with incurable diseases. Always without charge, always leaving when it's over, or when they recover," Edward suggested. Joachim pursed his lips, clearly skeptical. "In most cases, sir, the outcome was as expected, considering the severity of the conditions. However, there are some reports, unofficial, you understand, of inexplicable improvements. Temporary in most cases." Edward absorbed the information in silence. There was an explanation, after all. Not one that fully satisfied his need for logic, but one that began to make human sense. A woman who had lost her twin sister, and now dedicated her life to being present when others faced the same fate. "There is one more thing, sir," Joachim added, visibly uncomfortable. Some of the doctors who treated these cases questioned her methods. There was even an accusation of the illegal practice of medicine in Denver, although the case was dismissed for lack of evidence. "Is she tampering with my daughter's medications, Joachim?" Edward asked directly. "I have no proof of that, sir. But how else can we explain the inexplicable?" The butler adjusted his posture. "You built an empire based on logic and science. You always said that for every problem, there is a rational solution. And now my daughters are getting better," Edward completed. "And that is all that matters to me." Dismissing the butler with a gesture, Edward remained alone, lost in thought. The pieces were fitting together in a strange way, creating a puzzle he had never imagined contemplating. A woman who had lost someone to the same disease, who had abandoned conventional medicine, who appeared like a benevolent ghost to accompany the final moments of those suffering from the same illness, or perhaps in some rare cases, to witness the impossible. When he finally left the office, he found the house in a different mood. The curtains had been opened, soft music flowed from somewhere, and as he passed through the hallway, he heard the most precious sound in the world, the laughter of his daughters. In the room, a scene that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Louisa sitting in an armchair, a book on her lap, Raffaella drawing on an improvised board, and Beatrice leaning on a makeshift walker, taking hesitant steps under Helena's watchful eye. "Look, Dad, 3 steps today," Beatrice exclaimed upon seeing him. Edward felt his eyes burn. He approached and hugged his daughter, who, though still frail, was standing on her own 2 legs. Over Beatrice's shoulder, his gaze met Helena's. There was no triumph there, only a serene compassion. "Helena, can we talk?" he asked after celebrating the progress of each of the girls. They went out to the balcony. The day was exceptionally clear, and the Santa Monica Mountains seemed closer than ever. "I know about your sister," Edward said without preamble. "About Marina?" Helena showed no surprise. Her eyes, fixed on the horizon, seemed momentarily deeper, as if seeing beyond the landscape. "Marina was my other half," she replied simply. "When she left, she took a part of me that I never recovered. But she left something in return." "What?" This clarity about what really matters when time is short. Edward studied that serene face, searching for signs of deceit, of manipulation, of charlatanism. He found none. "Why didn't you tell me? Why use another name?" Helena smiled slightly. "Names sometimes carry expectations. Helena Cameron was a nurse with protocols, limitations, a history recorded in charts and reports. Helena Grace is just someone who is present. No labels, no past to interfere with the moment. The doctors want to talk to you. They believe you are using some alternative treatment on my daughters." "And what do you believe, Mr. Monroe?" The question caught Edward off guard. What did he believe, after all? The rational businessman wanted a logical explanation. Secret herbal remedies, Eastern medicine techniques, anything that could be categorized and understood. But the father, witnessing the inexplicable, "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted finally. "I just know my daughters were fading before my eyes, and now they are coming back. And that you arrived when all seemed lost." Helena nodded as if that answer was enough. "I will speak with the doctors if it brings them comfort. But I don't have answers that will satisfy their science." "Did you—" Edward hesitated. "In the other houses with the other families, did the children really get better?" A veil of sadness passed over Helena's eyes. "Some did temporarily. Most did not. I don't control fate, Mr. Monroe. I only offer what I can while I am here. And how long do you stay?" Until the end. Until my presence is no longer needed. No more, no less." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Dr. Rivers had returned with additional test results. Edward asked Helena to stay with the girls while he saw the doctor. In the entrance hall, Joachim was already receiving Dr. Rivers and 2 other doctors. One of them was Dr. Paul Mendez, an internationally renowned neuroscientist whom Edward had contacted in the first weeks of the illness, without success. "Mr. Monroe," Dr. Mendez greeted, his voice carrying the distinct accent of someone who had spent many years abroad. "When Dr. Rivers contacted me about your daughter's case, I rearranged my schedule immediately. What is being reported is unprecedented." Edward led the doctors to his office. Where they could speak freely, Dr. Rivers spread test results across the desk. We compared today's results with those from 3 days ago. The difference is statistically impossible to ignore. It's not just stabilization, it's a partial reversal of the neurological damage. Dr. Mendez adjusted his glasses, examining the results. In 30 years of practice, I have never seen anything remotely similar. This specific condition is characterized precisely by its irreversibility. So we are witnessing a medical miracle? Edward asked, unable to contain the hope in his voice. The doctors exchanged uncomfortable glances. In science, Mr. Monroe, Dr. Mendez replied carefully, when we find something that contradicts established knowledge, we don't call it a miracle. We call it an anomaly that requires investigation. Edward saw where the conversation was heading. You want to turn my daughters into case studies. We want to understand what is happening, Dr. Rivers corrected, for their benefit and for future patients. And to do that, we need to understand exactly what has changed in the last few days. Helena, Edward concluded. Precisely, Dr. Mendez agreed. This woman, her methods, her techniques. There are rumors in the medical community about similar cases. A sort of itinerant healer who appears in terminal cases. She was a nurse, Edward informed them, at the UCLA Medical Center. We know, Dr. Rivers replied. We've already checked her history. She was a competent professional, but nothing in her training explains what we are seeing here. Maybe some things don't need to be explained, Edward suggested, surprising himself with his own words. He who had always demanded rational explanations for everything now found himself defending the inexplicable. Mr. Monroe, Dr. Mendez leaned forward, his tone suddenly more grave. I understand your gratitude for your daughter's improvement, but you need to consider some less comfortable possibilities, such as medication tampering, unapproved substances, experimental techniques without ethical protocol. Edward felt a wave of indignation. Are you suggesting Helena is using my daughters as guinea pigs? I am suggesting that an unexplained improvement requires a full investigation for the protection of the girls themselves. The tension was broken by a knock on the door. It was Joachim, his usually composed face now marked by an unusual urgency. Sir, forgive the interruption, but the girls are asking for you. And he hesitated briefly. Rafaela has managed to stand up as well. The doctors looked at each other, stunned. Edward rose immediately, followed by the 3 specialists. On the way to the room, Dr. Mendez whispered, This is simply impossible. The rate of neuromotor recovery couldn't... His words died as they entered the room. Rafaela, the most fragile of the 3, was standing next to Beatrice, both supported by makeshift walkers. Louisa, still seated, was clapping, encouraging her sisters. Helena stood a little apart, observing the scene with a serene smile. The doctors immediately surrounded the girls, asking questions, checking reflexes, incredulous at what they saw. Edward approached Helena, who remained discreetly on the sidelines. You knew this would happen, he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Helena looked at him, her calm eyes reflecting a wisdom that Edward was only beginning to comprehend. I hoped, she replied simply. Life has a strength of its own when we allow it to flow. In that moment, Edward made a decision that contradicted everything he had built over his pragmatic life. Turning to the doctors, he announced with an authority that brooked no argument. Gentlemen, I appreciate your dedication and knowledge, but from now on, any decision about my daughter's treatment will include Helena's opinion. She stays. Dr. Mendez looked shocked. Mr. Monroe, as a scientist, I cannot endorse. I'm not asking for your endorsement, Doctor. I am informing you of how it will be. As the doctors withdrew to discuss the unprecedented situation, Edward felt a strange lightness. For the first time since the diagnosis, he wasn't just reacting to events. He was choosing his path, even if it was one he had never imagined treading. From the hallway, Joachim observed the scene with an indescribable expression, a mixture of astonishment, skepticism, and perhaps a flicker of something that could be called faith. The days that followed brought transformations that no one would have dared to predict. The Monroe penthouse, once a luxurious mausoleum awaiting the inevitable, now pulsed with a renewed energy that was contagious to everyone. The triplets progressed at a steady pace. Beatrice, always the strongest, could now walk around the room with minimal assistance. Raffaella gradually regained her motor skills with quiet determination. Louisa, though still the most fragile of the three, surprised everyone with her cognitive recovery. Her vocabulary returned, and her questions once again had the insatiable curiosity that had always characterized her. The doctors, initially skeptical, now documented every improvement with a mixture of scientific enthusiasm and bewilderment. Dr. Rivers, in particular, spent hours analyzing results, searching for explanations in medical literature, and consulting with international specialists. "It's unprecedented," he would often comment, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed charts. Simply unprecedented. Edward watched everything with a gratitude that barely fit in his chest. The pragmatic businessman he had always been was giving way day by day to a man who was beginning to recognize the value of things that couldn't be bought, measured or controlled. One afternoon, while the girls were resting after a physical therapy session, Edward found Helena in the sunroom. She was tending to an orchid that had seemed on the verge of death for weeks, but was now sporting a new bud. "They're really recovering, aren't they?" he asked, sitting beside her. It wasn't a rhetorical question. Even in the face of the evidence, he needed confirmation. Helena smiled, her fingers gently supporting the flower's fragile stem. "They are finding their way back, each at her own pace. The doctors are starting to talk about a historic medical case. They want to publish articles, present at conferences. Humans always need to catalog what they don't understand. To give names, create categories. It's comforting." Edward watched her for a moment. In the last few days, he had started to notice small changes in Helena, an occasional fatigue, moments of distraction. Nothing that interfered with her care for the triplets, but enough to spark a sense of unease. "Are you okay?" Helena turned to him, surprised by the question. For an instant, her mask of serenity seemed to falter, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "I am present," she finally replied. "That's what matters." "That's not what I asked." A silence formed between them, filled only by the soft gurgle of the fountain in the center of the garden. Helena took a deep breath, as if preparing for something difficult. "Every presence has its cost. Mr. Monroe, to be truly with someone in their moment of greatest need demands something of us." "And what has it demanded of you?" Helena's eyes, usually so clear and direct, shifted to the orchid. "When Marina got sick, I was just a nurse. I believed in science, in protocols, in machines and medications. When none of that was enough, when I watched her fade day after day while I stood helplessly beside her," her voice faltered slightly. "Something inside me changed. I realized I had neglected the one thing that truly mattered, being present. Not as a nurse, not as a twin desperate for a cure, but simply as someone walking alongside, without trying to control the uncontrollable." "And is that what you promised her? To be present for others?" Helena nodded slowly. "On her last day, Marina made me promise, not that I would find a cure, she knew there wasn't one, but that I would be present, completely present for those who faced the same path, that I would offer what no one offered us, not false hope, not miraculous solutions, just authentic presence." Edward felt a lump in his throat. "And all those children, all those families before us. Each of them received everything I had to give. Some passed on in peace. Others, like your daughters, found their own way back." Helena finally looked at him. "I never know what the outcome will be. I don't have that power. I just offer what I promised to offer." "At the cost of your own life," Edward concluded, finally realizing what he saw in her eyes, a weariness that went beyond the physical, an exhaustion of the soul. Helena smiled gently. "I don't see it as a cost. I see it as a purpose." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Sonia, who entered the garden with a radiant expression. "Sir, Louisa is asking to go to the pool. She says she wants to feel the water, even if it's just with her feet." Edward exchanged a quick glance with Helena, who nodded encouragingly. "Prepare everything. Sonia, we'll take all three." In the following hours, the penthouse became a hive of activity. Staff set up a system to safely transport the girls to the pool area. Nurses prepared portable equipment. Mrs. Sonia and the kitchen staff organized a special snack to be served by the water. Even Joachim, who had maintained his reservations about Helena, participated actively, supervising every detail with his usual efficiency. Something had changed in the butler too, a rigidity that was beginning to yield, like ice exposed to the sun. When the triplets were finally settled into special lounge chairs near the pool, their faces glowed with an excitement Edward hadn't seen in months. The Los Angeles sky was spectacularly blue, and the sea breeze brought a scent of salt and possibilities. "Can I really put my feet in the water, Dad?" Louisa asked, her large eyes fixed on the pool's crystal-clear surface. "Of course you can, my love," Edward replied, already moving to help her. Carefully, he removed her slippers and socks, exposing pale feet that hadn't touched anything but hospital sheets for weeks. Slowly, with Helena supporting one side and Edward the other, they helped Louisa sit on the edge of the pool. When her feet touched the warm water, the girl let out a sigh of pure pleasure. "It's like magic," she whispered, wiggling her toes. "I can feel every drop." Soon Beatrice and Rafaela joined their sister, the three of them sitting side by side, their feet dangling in the water, while Helena told stories about the sea at Big Sur and the shells that whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. Edward stepped back a little, watching the scene with a lump in his throat. The contrast between the present and the desperate scene from a week ago was almost painful in its intensity. Joachim approached discreetly, offering him a glass of water with lemon. Edward accepted, grateful for the unexpected gesture. "Thank you, Joachim, for everything." The butler inclined his head slightly. "It is my job, sir." "It goes beyond your job, and we both know it." Edward looked directly at his long-time employee. "I know you perhaps still have your reservations about Helena." Joachim adjusted his posture, ever formal even in the most extraordinary circumstances. "I admit I questioned her methods, sir. My concern has always been the family's well-being. And now, what do you think?" The butler looked at the girls, at their animated faces, at the life that seemed to be flowing back into their small bodies. For an instant his professional mask wavered, revealing the man behind the uniform. "Now I think that perhaps there are things my 40 years of service did not teach me to understand. And that is not necessarily a bad thing." Edward smiled, touched by the almost philosophical admission from his ever-pragmatic butler. "It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Discovering the world is bigger than we believed." "Unsettling, sir, but also—" Joachim hesitated, searching for the word. "Comforting, in a way. The day unfolded like a good dream, the kind you fear waking up from." The girls laughed, ate with renewed appetite, and even sang some of the songs Helena had taught them. The household staff gravitated around the pool, finding small excuses to pass by and witness what many were already calling the miracle of the Monroe triplets. In the late afternoon, when the girls began to show signs of tiredness, Edward organized their return to their room. On the way, Rafaela fell asleep in her father's arms, a peaceful sleep, without the tremors and irregular breathing that had marked her nights for so long. After settling the three of them, Edward found Helena on the balcony, watching the sun begin to set behind the Los Angeles mountains. There was something different about her posture, a stillness that went beyond her usual serenity. "Today was a perfect day," Edward commented, joining her. "Yes, it was," Helena agreed, her voice as soft as the wind that gently stirred her hair. "The girls are progressing more than anyone could have hoped. Dr. Rivers talked about starting to reduce some medications tomorrow, and maybe beginning a new, more intensive physical therapy protocol." Helena smiled, but Edward noticed the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a distance there, as if part of her was already somewhere else. "Helena, is there something you're not telling me?" She turned to him, and for the first time since her arrival, Edward saw full vulnerability in her gaze. "My journey here is coming to an end, Mr. Monroe." The words fell between them like stones. Edward felt a sudden chill despite the warmth of the California afternoon. "What? No, you can't go. The girls need you. He hesitated, surprised by the intensity of his own feelings. "We need you." Helena looked at him with tenderness. "The girls have found their way back. Now they need to continue on their own, with you by their side. My complete presence has served its purpose. But what if they get worse again? What if this is just temporary?" "It won't be." The conviction in Helena's voice was unshakable. "Whatever triggered the illness, they have overcome it. Not with medicine or miracles, but with their own life force. All they needed was someone to believe it was possible. And why does it have to be now? Why not stay a few more days just to be sure? Helena reached out her hand, lightly touching Edward's arm, the first physical contact she had initiated between them. Because there are other families, other children, and because, she hesitated briefly, because staying longer than necessary creates roots that I cannot allow. My path is to move on, Mr. Monroe. It is the promise I made. Edward wanted to argue, to use all his negotiation skills, to offer anything to make her stay. But something in her eyes stopped him, a serene determination that he recognized somehow. It was the look of someone who had found their purpose and would not deviate from it no matter the personal cost. When? Was all he could manage to ask. Tomorrow, after I've made sure everything is in order. Edward nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable. The girls will be devastated. They will understand in time. Children have a wisdom we often underestimate. They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the city lights begin to dot the landscape as the sky turned purple and orange. You changed this house, Edward said finally. You changed me. Helena smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. No, Mr. Monroe. I only reminded you of what you always knew but perhaps forgot along the way. And what would that be? First, as that true control doesn't come from trying to dominate life, but from knowing when to surrender to it. That night, the Monroe penthouse fell asleep, enveloped in an atmosphere of transformation. The staff, sensing the imminent change without fully understanding it, moved with an almost religious reverence through the corridors. The nurses watched their monitors, marveling at the increasingly stable vital signs. Even Joachim, on his final nightly round, paused briefly before the room where Helena rested, as if paying a silent tribute. In the Triplets' room, Edward broke his routine and decided to spend the entire night. He settled into an armchair between the beds, watching his daughter's peaceful sleep. For the first time in weeks, there was no fear in his heart as he contemplated the future, only a deep gratitude and a growing understanding that perhaps there were forces in the world that his years of business and power had not taught him to recognize. In the room next door, Helena was packing her small bag, the same few belongings she had arrived with. Among her few possessions was an old photograph, two identical girls smiling at the camera, hugging on a beach. She turned the photo over and reread the handwritten inscription on the back. Where one goes, the other will also be. Always, Marina. A single tear rolled down her serene face as she put the photograph away. Her mission at the Monroe penthouse was complete. Tomorrow she would move on, carrying with her the promise made years ago, a promise that, however painful to keep, had become her reason for being. The morning arrived with a special luminosity, as if the sun itself decided to partake in the transformation occurring in that Bel Air penthouse. Edward awoke in the armchair where he had spent the night, his neck sore from the uncomfortable position, but his heart lighter than it had been in months. The triplets were still asleep, their breaths synchronized in a peaceful rhythm. Beatrice held the sun doll tightly. Louisa had wrapped a protective arm around the moon doll. Rafaela, the quietest, slept with the star doll resting on her chest like a talisman. Edward watched them for a few moments, absorbing every detail of a scene that, a week earlier, had seemed impossible. He rose silently and went into the hallway, where he found Dr. Rivers arriving for his morning visit. The doctor wore an unusual expression, a mix of scientific excitement and newfound humility. Good morning, Mr. Monroe. The results of the latest tests are in. He handed over a folder. It's extraordinary. The brain inflammation has reduced by nearly 70%. The blood markers are close to normal. The myelin degeneration has not only stabilized, but is showing signs of regeneration. Edward flipped through the reports, the numbers and charts dancing before his eyes. In layman's terms, Doctor, my daughters are in the process of complete recovery, the doctor finished, still seeming haunted by his own words. I cannot explain how or why. Nothing in the medical literature predicts such a reversal. We are witnessing something that defies all precedents. And the prognosis? If the progression continues at this rate, in a few weeks they could resume almost all normal activities. They'll need intensive physical therapy, of course, and continuous monitoring. But the sentence, the doctor hesitated. The sentence has been revoked, Mr. Monroe. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Edward felt his eyes burn. Thank you, Doctor, for not giving up on my daughters. Dr. Rivers adjusted his glasses, visibly emotional as well. I am a scientist, Mr. Monroe. I've dedicated my life to understanding the human body and its diseases. But what we've witnessed here, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say it has reminded me that science still has much to learn about the mysteries of life. After the doctor began his examination of the girls, who were slowly waking, Edward went to find Helena. He found her in the sunroom, watering the plants with methodical care. She wore simple, practical clothes, and a small bag rested discreetly by her side. So it's true, he said, approaching. You're really leaving today. Helena turned with a serene smile. Has Dr. Rivers given you the good news? Yes, he used the word extraordinary several times. I believe your daughters will soon be inspiring medical dissertations in universities around the world. She smiled, placing the watering can on a table. Science always finds its ways to catalogue the inexplicable. It's comforting in a way. Not for me. Not anymore, Edward admitted. Some things perhaps don't need to be explained, just accepted. Helena looked at him with a soft expression of approval. That, coming from the man who built an empire on logic and control, there's perhaps the greatest miracle in this house. They laughed together, a moment of shared lightness that Edward realized he would miss. How will you tell the girls? I already have, Helena replied. Earlier when they briefly woke up, Edward frowned, surprised. And how did they react? I didn't hear any crying, any protests. Children understand partings better than adults, Mr. Monroe. They don't carry our fear of abandonment, our need for control. They know that everything comes and everything goes, like the seasons. You sound like you're describing Zen masters, not 3 7-year-old girls. Helena smiled. Perhaps all children are wise, until we teach them how to fear the flow of life. Mrs. Sonia appeared at the door, her hands nervously adjusting her apron. Sir, the girls are asking if they can have breakfast on the balcony today. Dr. Rivers has already approved. Edward nodded, and the housekeeper left to arrange the request. He turned back to Helena. Can't you stay a little longer? Just to see them savor this small freedom? I've already seen them find much more than that, Mr. Monroe. I've seen them find life again. She picked up her bag. It's time. They walked down the hallway together, a comfortable silence between them. The staff they encountered along the way seemed to sense what was happening. Many offered respectful smiles, some even small bows. Joachim was waiting in the main hall, his posture as impeccable as ever, but a new softness in his eyes. The documents you requested, madam, the butler said, holding out an envelope. Helena accepted it with a silent thank you. Edward cast a questioning look at Joachim, who explained, contacts for institutions that care for children with rare diseases. You mentioned yesterday that you would like to know about them. Edward realized that while he was struggling with her imminent departure, Helena had already planted seeds for her next destination. This was how she operated, without attachments, always moving, heading where her presence was needed. When they reached the balcony, they were greeted by a scene that made Edward's heart swell with emotion. The 3 girls were sitting at the table, more alert and animated than they had been in months. Beatrice, using a walker, had positioned herself on her own. Louisa was flipping through a storybook with renewed interest. Rafaela was carefully placing her star doll on the chair beside her, like a guest of honor for breakfast. Helena! Beatrice exclaimed upon seeing her. Come sit with us. Mrs. Sonia made those pancakes you taught her with banana and cinnamon. Helena approached, her bag still in hand. You all look beautiful this morning, my little ones. Are you really leaving today? Louisa asked directly, always the most frank of the 3. Yes, dear. As we talked about earlier, there are other children who need someone to be with them now. Rafaela, usually so quiet, reached out to touch Helena's hand. Will you stay with them like you stayed with us? Until they get better. Helena knelt to be at the girl's eye level. I will stay with them for as long as is necessary, whether it's for them to get better or for them to... She hesitated briefly. To go on their way in peace. Like Aunt Marina? Beatrice asked. Edward's eyes widened in surprise. He had never mentioned Helena's sister to the girls. He looked at Helena, who seemed equally surprised. How do you know about Marina? She asked softly. She told us, Louisa replied matter-of-factly. When we were in that dark, cold place before you came, she said her sister would come help us find our way back. A profound silence fell over the balcony. Edward felt a shiver run down his spine. Helena stood motionless for a moment, her eyes welling up for the first time since she had arrived at that house. "She said that?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Yes," Raffaella confirmed. "She said you promised her, and that you never break promises." Helena covered her mouth with one hand, containing an emotion that seemed to overflow from her usually controlled being. Edward, not knowing what to say or do, just placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Recovering with the serene dignity that characterized her, Helena took a deep breath and smiled at the girls. "It's true. I never break promises, and now I must keep another, to follow my path." The triplets exchanged glances as if sharing a secret. It was Beatrice who spoke. "We understand. But before you go, can you promise one more thing? If it's within my power, little one, promise you'll take care of yourself too. Aunt Marina said you sometimes forget to do that." Helena laughed, a genuine laugh that lit up her entire face. "I promise to try, Beatrice. That's the most I can offer." Breakfast proceeded in an atmosphere of serene farewell. The girls ate with renewed appetite, told stories, even made plans for when they were fully recovered. Helena participated in the conversation, but Edward noticed she was gradually pulling away, not physically but emotionally, as if she were already preparing everyone for her absence. When the final moment came, there was no drama. Helena hugged each of the triplets, whispering something personal in each of their ears. The girls surprisingly did not cry. There was an understanding in their eyes that transcended their age, as if, in their brief encounter with the threshold between worlds, they had acquired a wisdom that most adults would never attain. In the entrance hall, the household staff had formed a spontaneous line to say goodbye. A tearful Mrs. Sonia handed Helena a small basket with homemade bread and sweets. "For your journey," she explained, wiping her tears on her apron. Joachim, ever formal, gave a respectful bow. "It was an honor, madam. A true honor." Helena thanked each one individually, with the same mindful attention she dedicated to everything she did. Finally, at the main door, Edward found himself alone with her. Words seemed inadequate for all they had shared. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally. "You don't have to," Helena replied. "Just remember." "Remember what?" "That true strength lies not in control, but in surrender. In being present, completely present, even when, especially when, we cannot change what is happening." Edward nodded, absorbing that final lesson. "May I ask where you're going now?" "There's a family in New Orleans. 5-year-old girl with the same condition your daughter's had." "And you're going to cure her?" Helena smiled, that serene smile that had become so familiar in recent days. "I am going to be with her. The rest is not in my hands. And will we see each other again?" "Life has its own plans, Mr. Monroe. I've learned not to make promises beyond my immediate presence." With a final smile and a light touch on his arm, Helena turned and walked toward the elevator. Edward remained at the door, watching her leave. Before the doors closed, she looked at him one last time. "The real healing," she said softly, "always comes from within." And then she was gone, as mysteriously as she had arrived, leaving behind a transformed home and reborn lives. In the weeks that followed, the triplets' recovery became the subject of medical articles and case studies. Dr. Rivers and his team meticulously documented every stage, searching for scientific explanations for what they had witnessed. They spoke of spontaneous remission, of unknown variants of the disease, of atypical immune responses. Edward let them theorize. He had his own understanding of what had happened, one that didn't fit into scientific papers or medical charts, but that had completely transformed his worldview. 3 months after Helena's departure, the penthouse in Bel Air pulsed with renewed life. The triplets, now fully recovered, filled the corridors with laughter and games. Edward had reorganized his professional life, delegating responsibilities to be more present in his daughter's daily lives. The staff noticed the change. The boss, who was once obsessed with control, now seemed more relaxed, more connected, more present. One afternoon, while the girls were playing in the sunroom, Joachim approached with an envelope on a silver tray. "This arrived in the mail today, sir. No return address." Edward opened the envelope to find a single sheet of paper. In the center, handwritten in elegant script, was a simple sentence: Where there is silence on the edge of the end, there I will be. Presence is all I can offer. Below it, a small photograph. A smiling girl in a hospital bed, hugging a handmade doll with a small embroidered sun, identical to the one Beatrice still cherished. Edward smiled, placing the letter close to his heart. He needed no more explanations. He knew that somewhere in America, Helena Grace, or whatever her real name was continuing her silent journey, offering the most precious and most forgotten gift of all, full presence. In the garden, the triplets were singing one of the melodies Helena had taught them, their voices intertwining in perfect harmony. Beatrice held her sun doll, Louisa the moon doll, Raffaella the star doll, small symbols of a light that had once nearly been extinguished, but now shone brighter than ever. Edward joined them, sitting on the floor without a thought for his expensive suit. Beatrice immediately climbed into his lap, while Louisa and Raffaella settled beside him. Together they watched the California sunset paint the sky orange and purple. "Dad," Raffaella asked softly, "do you think Helena is okay?" Edward hugged his daughter, feeling a gratitude so profound it barely fit in his chest. "I'm sure she is, my love. She's exactly where she needs to be. And so are we, right?" Beatrice added with the simple wisdom of children. "Yes, my little one." Edward kissed the top of her head. "We are also exactly where we need to be, here now, present." As night fell gently over Los Angeles, the Monroe penthouse, once a luxurious mausoleum awaiting the inevitable, shone like a beacon of hope and renewal. A silent reminder that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes not in vials or sophisticated equipment, but in the simple and extraordinary art of being truly present. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Edward and his triplets has touched your hearts. For anyone who has faced moments of despair, Helena Grace's message resonates as a powerful reminder. Sometimes, when all seems lost, simple presence is the greatest gift we can offer. If this story stirred emotions in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next narratives that explore the mysteries and beauties of the human soul. After all, as Helena taught us, being present, truly present, is the greatest healing we can offer one another. Until our next story.